Hello, guys and girls. Welcome to another little. I don't know what they're Hannah reacts. They're not reaction videos per se, but that's what they're under the playlist on my channel is Hannah reacts. Welcome back. The past two little Hannah reacts, we did like creepypasta-esque videos, and now today I want to jump back in on a true crime video. I did make myself some brunch, so I'm gonna do like a little like brunch as well as a little reaction video. That's why you're up here now, because usually you're down here on my desk today while I'm eating. I'm gonna have you up here for like personal preference. I don't know. I think we are going to maybe pop in with a. This is tough. There's a lot going on. Let's see. I do really like Explain With Us. That sounded interesting enough. I also like Dave's Lemonade. I don't know. I think we might do the Dave's Lemonade because I think this case of Anik Richardson I've already seen. Richens. Oh, I'm loving it. I think I've already gotten my little toes wet in that, so I'm either gonna do that or the Explain With Us. I think I'm gonna do the Dave's Lemonade video, so let me get it set up. I got it all set up. I am going to have myself muted when I'm eating, just so you don't hear like the. But food reveal, little brunch reveal. 2 hash brown patties and then 2 chicken patties cut up into chicken fingers. And then for my sauce choice, some Diablo sauce. Yeah. With that being said, I'm going to play the video and mute myself so we could get going.
On the morning of December 18th, 2012, in the city of Durham, North Carolina, 26-year-old off-duty officer Kelly Stewart made the decision to report into work and go about a regular day on the job. As a member of the drug unit, he spent the morning in plain clothes, blue jeans, t-shirt, and a baseball cap, and operating an unmarked police SUV, would check with local hotels for reports of suspicious activity and parcels. At 9:54 a.m., he spots a red car sitting stationary on the side of the street, with the occupant of the vehicle speaking to a man standing near the driver's side window. The driver is 21-year-old Carlos Riley Jr., who had just dropped his girlfriend off at work around the corner, and on his way home he had spotted a friend walking down the street, so pulled over to talk with them. As the area that they were in is classified as a high drug crime area, the officer watches this conversation from a distance, suspecting possible illegal activity. At this early point of the story, the narrative will split into 2 very different paths, Officer Kelly's and Carlos Riley's. But before diving into the 2 versions of events, there are some facts that neither party dispute. These are as follows. Carlos drives away from the location where he was talking with his friend, and Kelly Stewart follows, very shortly after initiating a traffic stop. During the stop, an altercation between the 2 occurs, and the officer sustains a gunshot wound to his right thigh, fired from his very own service weapon. Carlos flees the scene, leaving the injured officer on the side of the road, and in his vehicle, some items that belong to the officer, his badge, handcuffs, gun and telephone, are all in Carlos's possession. Once law enforcement realize that one of their men are injured, an enormous manhunt is launched, with community lockdown being enforced, hundreds of vehicle searches executed, people detained as possible suspects, helicopters up in the air looking
Did they
over
just
the city,
say that
large-scale
the cop was shot with his own gun? Wait.
When a call
The cop was shot with his own gun, and then the guy who was being pulled over from a traffic stop stole all of his shit? That's getting suspicious. because the title is Officer Shoots Himself, question mark, but something's not clicking up here. It's giving attack. It's giving a cab. Which I mean, but like, punked.
Comes in from one of Carlos's family members. This person provides the location of the suspect, and when police arrive, Carlos, his 18-year-old brother, and a friend all exit a vehicle on the street. The three men are cooperative, and Carlos says that he was aware the family member called his location in. He was only there with his friend and brother out of fear of being shot and wanted their support. Both of these people with Carlos are arrested and charged with accessory after the fact. At the time of his arrest, it is unclear how Officer Kelly received the gunshot wound to his leg, but by the next morning, he claims that Carlos had shot him with his own weapon. Carlos is charged with assault on a law enforcement officer using a deadly weapon, 2 counts of assault with a firearm on a law enforcement officer, assault on a law enforcement officer, inflicting serious injury, robbery with a dangerous weapon, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, as he had previous gun possession charges, and careless, reckless driving. The driving charge coming up because that is what Officer Kelly stated he originally pulled Carlos over for. Carlos faced decades in prison should he be found guilty on these charges. The upcoming trial was one surrounded by controversy, racial profiling within the policing system, and claims of unnecessary violence were simmering under the surface already, mounting tension between the Durham community and their police force. This case would be like a volcano threatening to erupt. Focusing on this specific event though, and not what it may represent on a larger scale. At the core is 2 men who got into a fight, and it's one's word against the other. So let's begin with this is the story according to him. As he watched Carlos's interaction ending on the street, he observed the vehicle fishtailing and speeding off recklessly, endangering the community and people nearby. At this point, the officer decided to initiate a traffic stop for reckless driving. He put his lights on, and upon seeing this, Carlos pulled over immediately. Officer Kelly approaches the vehicle and observes Carlos to be nervous and sweating profusely. He instructs the driver out of the vehicle and retrieves Carlos's license and registration, which are placed onto the roof of the vehicle. Carlos is compliant during all of this. For an unknown reason, when the officer was not looking, Carlos grabs his items from the roof and re-enters the vehicle. The engine revs as he prepares to take off with the door still open, and the officer calls to him, "We're not done yet. Get back out." Officer Kelly grabs onto the door as the vehicle begins to move away, and manages to struggle his way inside, pulling the handbrake, which ultimately brings the car to a halt. A struggle ensues, and both men begin to fight. Kelly Stewart says that they were going blow for blow, and he testifies to being struck in the face multiple times. During the struggle, he instructs Carlos to stop resisting, but the man does not listen. In response, the officer
Yeah, I thought this was gonna be cut in July, but now this cop is telling me this kind of sus thing. I don't know, it seems a little sus to me, guys. It seems a little sus.
retrieves his handcuffs, causing Carlos to say, "Oh hell no." As Carlos sees the cuffs, he knocks them from the officer's hands and onto the floor of the vehicle. Because the two are in a tight space, the thrashing around sees Kelly's badge get ripped from the chain around his neck, and it also falls somewhere within the vehicle. Carlos does not stop resisting as the two continue to fight, and at this point, the officer testifies that he is on his back in the passenger seat, in an awkward position, with Carlos on top of him throwing punches. The officer pulls out his service weapon and yells, "Get back or I will shoot." Carlos does not comply and lunges for the weapon.
I'm laying further back in the seat. I'm on the back side of this passenger vehicle. Pull my gun out, get back, I'll shoot you. We grab the firearm as well. We started fighting over the handgun. His hands are on the gun as well. Went to pull the gun back, and we're fighting over the gun. I'm trying to bring it closer. We're fighting, and the gun is charged, and I received a gunshot wound to my right thigh.
Kelly says that his finger was not on the trigger at any point during this altercation, and using both hands, Carlos was able to push the weapon down and pull the trigger himself, which fired the round into Kelly's leg. The now injured officer continues to struggle as both men fight for control over the weapon. Carlos, who is holding onto the barrel, manages to wrestle it away. He points the gun at the officer and presses the magazine eject button. The magazine falls to the floor of the vehicle, to which Carlos quickly retrieves it and puts it back in, chambering a bullet ready to fire. Kelly Stewart says, quote, "He pointed the gun at me and said, 'I can't believe you tried to shoot me.' I was in the most unbearable pain that I'd ever felt and was fearing for my life. I told Riley, 'You know what? I'm sorry, you know? I was thinking about everything. I've been shot. A man's pointing a gun at me now. I'm thinking of my family, friends. I'm thinking he's going to kill me. Riley ordered me to leave his car and get back into my police cruiser, but I was hurting too much to get out. The pain was excruciating. I couldn't feel my leg. Riley, who was still holding the gun, pulled me out of his car and dropped me onto the parking lot at Forest Point Apartments. I'm lying on my back in the apartment complex, and Riley still had the gun pointed at me, and I'm telling him anything he wants to hear. Riley then got back in his car and sped away." End quote. Before Carlos drives away, he reverses his vehicle back to the officer's SUV and takes the man's cell phone, which was charging inside. So at this point, as he leaves the scene, he has in his possession the officer's service weapon, badge, cell phone and handcuffs. Officer Riley is quickly located, and in line with his story that the vehicle was moving away against his orders, he is found further down the road, away from his vehicle and other items that appear to have been removed during the fight, a chain and a shoe to name some. The man is transported to Duke University Hospital. Carlos Riley Jr. has another version of events as to what happened that morning. His side of the story is as follows. After speaking...
No, because I'm excited for this one, because the police officer stingy seems a little sus to me. Like, I know, like, believe the victim, but... Like, you know when you lie and you add, like, random details because you're lying? It's given that.
With his friend on the side of the road, he drives away in a normal manner. There were no fishtails or burnouts. The unmarked police vehicle pulls him over for reasons unknown and begins to question him about marijuana. The officer instructs him to get out of the vehicle, and Carlos complies with all instructions. He is frisked, and after finding nothing on his person, the officer does a quick car search, finding nothing there either. Carlos says that the handbrake of the vehicle wasn't on properly, and as the vehicle is on a hill, it begins to roll forward. The officer dives into the vehicle to pull the handbrake, then after doing so, strikes Carlos in the face multiple times. Carlos, confused, does not strike back, resulting in a struggle which sees him placed in an illegal chokehold. Carlos cannot breathe and fights hard to free himself. In doing so, the officer is knocked into the vehicle. Throughout this, Carlos claims that Kelly says multiple times, "I'm going to kill you." Now with Kelly inside of the vehicle on the driver's seat and Carlos standing outside of it, the officer draws his weapon, and as he does so, he accidentally shoots himself in the leg. A shocked Carlos easily takes the weapon away from the injured officer's hands with no resistance, and he says that he does so to prevent any further shots from being fired. Now in control of the weapon, he points it in the air to show that he is not intending to use it.
I don't know. Me personally, I believe in the second stingy. Hate to say it, hate to be that guy, but I think an important piece to note is that Officer Kelly is he's a plainclothes officer, so if, like, hello, ma'am, yeah, ma'am, he's a plainclothes officer, so I feel like, me personally, if some random guy pulled me over and was trying to essentially make a citizen's arrest because he's a plainclothes officer, I'd lose my shit. Not saying he did, because obviously his thing is a lot better than the other one. I don't know. I'm interested to see how this is gonna play out.
And says, "I can't believe you tried to shoot me." At this point of the story, many of the details from the two men are the same once more, with Carlos assisting the injured man out of the vehicle, then driving away with a number of items that fell from the officer's body during the altercation. Carlos says that he drove away in a panic, fear fueled by recent media publication of police shooting black men, and highly afraid that the same may happen to him, being shot immediately as the police arrive without asking any questions first. Carlos says that as he drives away, he throws the weapon from the vehicle into the woods nearby, then contacts friends and family about what he should do, waiting a few hours before turning himself in. So this is the story according to the defense, and at trial, Carlos's attorney Alex Chance would go on to highlight a number of inconsistencies with the state's argument. He would put heavy focus on the evidence that was not submitted throughout the proceedings as well. Some of the more notable examples of this are as follows. Officer Kelly did not follow regulation as he chose to not call the traffic stop in before leaving his vehicle, something that is required for Durham police to do, protocol that is in place to both protect the officer and the public. Any investigation by internal affairs following this breach of rules was not provided by the state. The official gunshot report that was filled out a few minutes after the shooting occurred indicates that it was the officer who discharged the weapon. This document was not introduced as evidence by the state. Attorney Chance argues that it is unclear who did the shooting based on the officer's 911 call, a call that we unfortunately are unable to listen to, and that it wasn't until the next morning that Kelly had begun to tell the story that he was the victim of another man's actions. Attorney Chance continues with his argument by showing that there were over 90 witnesses on the state's list, experts, both medical and forensic, and barely any of them were called to the stand. A confusing detail indeed, as many of these experts, were Kelly's story true, would have drastically bolstered his position. The medical records that were introduced by the state show that the only injury Kelly sustained was the gunshot wound to his thigh. And after 2 examinations, nothing even remotely came close to mentioning that he had bruises, lacerations, or bleeding from his face, lips, and mouth, as a result of the blow-for-blow beating he...
What did I say? I freaking knew it. Okay, I don't know. Like I said, the officer's story was just a little sus to me.
He said he sustained. Injuries that were very present on Carlos. No photographs were submitted of Officer Kelly's face, which could have supported his testimony of going blow for blow. This is not through a lack of photographs either. As it is known, a large amount of photos were taken of his full body following the incident. Another series of photographs, which were conveniently absent during trial, were those of Carlos's hands. Following the firing of the weapon, if Carlos wrestled the gun holding the barrel as Kelly testified, then it would be expected for the man to have burn marks on his hands. Medical records and photographs do show that Carlos was in fact injured, with bruises to the face and a laceration to his hand, but no burn marks were noted anywhere. The interior of the vehicle was so tight that for the altercation to have unfolded in the way Kelly testifies, Alex argues that the men would need to wield shape-shifting abilities to have gotten into the positions discussed. Text messages were introduced by the state between Carlos and people he knew, and they would argue that these messages prove the awareness that Carlos had over his own wrongdoing, as all of the messages discuss avoiding authorities. The defense, on the other hand, would point out that it all seems to be messages laced with fear and terror, fear of being unfairly shot on sight. And finally, quite possibly the most damning evidence of all, after the gunshot, a woman who worked in the building near where this happened ran over to her window to look out, and as she did, she saw the officer in the driver's seat, with Carlos holding the weapon in his right hand to the sky. As she watched, she saw Carlos move the officer out of the vehicle, then reverse his vehicle to the SUV before driving away. Many details of her testimony and statement were in direct conflict with the officer's recollection of events. The state would not choose to argue any of these claims in closing statements, instead focusing on what they had introduced. the handcuffs and badge found in a public restroom bathroom near to a location known to Carlos, the officer's phone being found on the road a few blocks from the incident, and seeing as the weapon was never recovered, the state...
I think Officer Kelly's like team kind of crazy for this one. I love how like no pictures of the officer being like beaten and battered were submitted for evidence, but they are like, oh my god, look, he sent text messages, so like obviously he did it. He threw the stuff away in the garbage can. Obviously he did it. And then that lady, that slay girl boss, who was like, no, I saw this guy outside holding the gun up in the air, kind of like what Carlos had said. What is that all about, Officer Kelly, huh?
Would double down on the argument that Carlos was a dangerous individual who resisted arrest, instigated a violent altercation, then robbed the officer, going on to try and avoid authorities. The jury would not find much weight in the state's case, ultimately ruling in favor of Carlos, finding him not guilty on all charges except one. The charge that they found him guilty on was robbery, for the action of taking the officer's
Tik Tok.
the officer's phone and other belongings before driving away. One of the jurors would say, quote, "The state's case was weak. I wanted to see pictures of Stewart's gunshot wound, more information on the gun residue, and expert testimony about the trajectory of the shot. Any time we're guessing as a jury, that's just too much doubt to send a man to prison." End quote. Although this may seem like good news for supporters of Carlos, and bad for those of Kelly, Carlos would not walk free, as he would go on to serve 10 years in prison. The reason being is he had pled guilty in federal court prior to this trial, in relation to this case, on the charge of possession of a firearm by a felon. At this point of the video, I'd like to make a note that I have moved away from research, and now speak from my own thoughts and feelings. I am fully aware that the discussion surrounding police corruption is one that is passionately argued and highly complicated, an argument that I don't intend to fully explore inside of this video. What I will say though, is that the defense attorney sure knew what he was doing when he crafted his argument around the possibility that the police were not playing by the rules, constructing more than enough necessary reasonable doubt within a very troubling situation. Attorney Alex Chance would say that the entire situation was a railroad, a cover-up for bad policing. Prior to the trial taking place, in an in-chambers, off-the-record meeting, the state would attempt to get him removed from the case. The DA would ask the judge to remove Alex as Riley's counsel, as they claimed he was insufficiently informed about criminal rules and procedures. Alex would say that this request was unusual to say the least, as in his 32 years of experience, of someone who specializes in police misconduct cases and criminal trials, someone who was appointed to the case specifically because of his qualifications. He was thoroughly confused by this request. Alex would demand that the discussion be moved to open court, and the prosecution's request to have him removed was denied by the judge. A tough call that Mr. Chance made during the trial was one that saw him forfeit the opportunity to present any witnesses or evidence of his own, in exchange to have the final closing argument. All I can say is what an absolute risky move, hey, as there seemed to be quite a lot of evidence that he would have been able to submit, the gunshot report and witness testimony to name a few, but he chose against this for those final words which seemed to thoroughly pay off. I personally find cases of police misconduct to be rather troubling, as I hold a high amount of respect for our justice system and law enforcement personnel. In an ideal situation, the law and its representatives are meant to be cogs in the machine of justice, all operating and working in sync for the one goal, a goal that sees the public protected and truth sought out, irrespective of the individual's personal bias, egos and viewpoints. I am aware that police are people, and people are not perfect. Some may be dealing with deep-seated issues surrounding power, control, superiority and ego, trigger-happy and attitude-blazing as they act as uniformed vigilantes masquerading as law enforcement, defending their own agendas rather than the safety of the public as they are sworn to protect. I am aware and understand that these people exist, just as I am aware within every facet of life. There is mud that can sully the clear waters. But what I expect of people, especially people within the justice system, is to hold the others around them accountable when the clear waters get a little murky. As mentioned though, I am fully aware that this world is far from perfect, and it's a confrontingly unfortunate reality that within any system...
So, final thoughts. I kind of didn't want to listen to him, like, sharing his thoughts. No offense. I don't know, final thoughts. I feel like that's crazy how that cop essentially lied and how everyone was kind of like backing the cop, and then like evidence and proof came out that the cop was lying, and then people were kind of like, oh no. Much like the lady on the jury stand said, where was like the photo evidence? Where was, you know, like the test on the gun? Where were one of these little things that could possibly roll in the cop's favor? I said roll, I meant roll? Roll in the cop's favor? Anyway, it's still sad he served time, but I get it. He did technically rob. I wouldn't say... Okay, so by law, he technically didn't rob all of the stuff. He just robbed the phone because, like he said, the cop was in his car. So, I don't know how... Oh, and possession of a firearm as a felon. I get that one. A lot of people don't follow that rule. I do know a felon. I don't... Well, I used to know a felon who had guns. So, you get mixed opinions with that one. I will see you on Friday with a little video. I don't know what I'm doing yet. But with that being said, see you later, alligator.